Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Hi, my name is Drew, and I'm a grateful recovering sex and drug addict.
Hi, Drew.
Those are benedictions. Two very different communities, but they are community. And I just can't imagine not having my foot in one community, the recovery community, and my foot in the faith community. My road would not be the same without both of those worlds. What this ministry has done for me is it's really integrated my life. Early on in my life, when I was probably 6 or 7 years old, I was sexually abused by my grandfather, my father's father. My sister had also been sexually abused. And I'm not saying that to get your sympathy, but to talk about oftentimes when there is adverse childhood experiences or childhood trauma, it affects the trajectory of a person into their adulthood. And it certainly, that was true for me. I was ripe for addiction. I was ripe for addiction. But what this ministry has done for me is it's integrated my life since then. I started to get in recovery in January 1st, 1980. And it was right after New Year's Eve. That was my gift to myself, was I was gonna stop. And I did. And with not just myself, but with the two communities helping me out and making that happen. And what that did, I was very involved with the faith community. My parents, my mom was the first woman in the church council. My dad was the head usher. So whenever the church doors were open, I was there. You know, I sang in the choir since I was age 5, and I still sing in the choir. And I'm going to be close to, I'm going to turn 64. So I'd always been doing music ministry, and then I started to do youth ministry. I was born and raised in the Lutheran church, a Norwegian Lutheran church, ja, sure, you bet, you know, good Norwegian. Well, I was a Luther League president, so I was very involved with the youth program. Then I got involved, then I got into drugs, and I really kind of acting out that pain that I was experiencing, and that confusion and just the angst of what went on with me, and really pointing my fingers at my parents and going, why didn't you protect me? You know, and now I look at what happened, and I look at adverse childhood experiences. We're going to talk a little bit about that because it can be part of our trajectory into this ministry, and I think it becomes a very powerful foundational piece. For some congregations, they become trauma-informed congregations. So you're able to respond to people that are experiencing trauma in their life, or don't even know that they've had trauma, or acknowledge that they've had trauma in your life. As Al speaks to, it's a family disease. And what happens to the person who's not identified as the problem person? And it's often those people that are sitting in the pew, not necessarily the active addict, but the family members of that person with addiction. So I'm still waiting on, but I'm gonna see if I can do this. Zoom world, you're not gonna be able to see some of this, and I apologize. And actually, I can't move this. Oh, there we go. Good, good, good. As soon as we can, I'll share a screen so you can see the PowerPoint, but I can't do it right now. This is really what I want to try to accomplish as we move forward with today. At least to entertain the questions of why this ministry, what is this ministry, and how do we do it? How do we get started? How do we get this initiated? So those are the questions that we ask. And I can imagine that's true for you. I told you a glimpse of my story, started to unpack my story a little bit. We all have a story that we come to, that we bring with us. And that is often becomes part of our calling of why we're doing the things that we're doing. It's because we've been touched by these issues in a certain way. Oops. So I'm not going to dive into this. And like I said, I have way too many slides for the amount of time that we can do this. But this slide I thought was very important especially looking at the pandemic. And just think of our children. You know, some of them have been out of school for a year, and now they're just getting back in. They're wondering, what's pandemic? What does that mean? You know, I can't get a vaccination because I'm under 12. I mean, there's all these questions that are being asked, you know, and turmoil. As we all know, mental health issues have risen. When we look at youth, anxiety is high, depression is high, suicidal ideation is high, all of those things. And in some level, we look at that bottom part and we look at the context of where people are at. Here we have historical trauma, and we can talk about slavery. We can talk about the Native American population. We can talk about where it is generational in my own life, where I had a grandfather who was molesting children, you know. Then we look at the social conditions. Here we have the pandemic, and that leads to adverse childhood experiences. When we talk about adverse childhood experiences, we're talking about neglect, we're talking about abuse, either emotional, physical, sexual abuse, or we're talking about family dysfunction. You know, either someone's been incarcerated in the family, or there's mental health issues in the family, there's divorce or separation, those types of things, which in some cases we see it as commonplace. But this creates trauma, or at least adverse childhood experiences for, and that leads to how we change our mental life changes. We start to be hypervigilant in how we approach life. It's kind of a fight or flight, even though what's happening in the situation doesn't match our response to the situation, because we've had that early childhood trauma. Social, emotional, cognitive impairment. Again, the brain is not working fully and functioning fully. Adoption of health risk behaviors. And you could do a day-long workshop with any one of these, but I just wanted us to get a feel of that to early death. So talking about childhood trauma, here we look at both the environment as well as within the individual and their family or familial. I'd mentioned the different abuse, neglect, and family dysfunction, just as kind of foundational pieces, and then some of the health risk behaviors that take place based on that. Now, having that as a context and thinking about why would the church want to approach this? You know, this seems like social ills, and you know, where is the church? What role do they play in all of this? And so one of the things, and this came from the book, anyone heard of Gerald May, Addiction and Grace? That's been around forever. A medical doctor. He wouldn't call himself a theologian, but he really was pretty much a theologian as well. But one of the things, and I'd like to read this, you know, he talks about the concept of the whole in the soul. And he says, whatever shape it takes, May would argue it's a longing to love and to be loved, and a desire for the source of that love, God. When this same yearning is distorted, it is the origin of our most destructive urges and actions. Then it is the soil from which addiction grows. And I know early on in trying to, I would act out my pain, I would act out those things, and that's true for many people that are sitting in the pews. Their life is kind of unraveling and they're not communicating it to anybody. So one of the things that happens is, instead of, if we have this hole in our soul, what we tend to do is we tend to fill it up. We fill it up with addiction, we fill it up with getting busy, we fill it up with possessions, we fill it up with all sorts of things. And what I've learned through my recovery is, we don't need to fill the hole, we need to go into the hole. And that's where we meet God. If pain is the cause and pain is the consequence, pain is also the solution. And walking through that pain, not avoiding the pain, but having pain be our friend, be someone who informs us and not push it away. And that is a big to me, a big reason why when we talk about churches, we avoid these topics because it's hurt people hurting people because they aren't talking about these things. It's like you've heard of Henri Nouwen or Henry Nouwen. He talks about the wounded healer. Well, there's also the unhealed wounders, people that have not walked through this healing journey and they end up hurting people around them. Are you going to put? Thank you, Karen. There you go. Hopefully everyone has this. Read the report. Could I get a thumbs up from anyone who can now see the PowerPoint in Zoom land? Thumbs up. Excellent. Good, 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 good. Thanks, Karen. So that hole in the soul. So instead of filling it up, to go inside that hole. And to be able to do that really speaks to the underlying goals of our ministry, of Faith Partners Ministry. The three underlying goals is basically to create a safe place. And how do we create a safe place? You know, one of the things is we start to develop an authentic community. And how do you create an authentic community? It's really, there's two hallmarks to an authentic community. One is transparency. You know, how many churches, when you think of your own church, is it transparent? Do they know what's going on in your life with all its warts? Just this last month, I have a pastor friend in Wisconsin that her nephew committed suicide. He was 20 years old, just starting off life, wonderful, wonderful kid, committed suicide. His mother then relapsed into her alcoholism. Just this last month. Another one, I have a choir member, we've started singing again. And then believe me, it's so beautiful to be able to breathe with a group of people and make a joyful noise and be amongst, we're all sitting in the sanctuary all over the place with masks on, so it doesn't have the same thing of being right next to each other. But she came up to me and she goes, Drew, I know what you do. And I want you to know my son, they just had a baby, he and his wife just had a baby, and he has found out that she's been having an affair throughout this whole time of the process of the baby, and now she has postpartum depression. So she's suicidal, and then she's relapsed. Just this month, those two things, and those are complicated situations. They're complicated situations. So do we back up from that and go, that's not for us, that's for them? Or do we lean into that, knowing we have all sorts of resources in our back pocket? And that is part of what this model is all about. It's realizing our limitations, but creating a foundation, creating a safe place so people can step into this ministry. I lived in Austin, Texas for 12 years, and we would have some people that would get into this ministry, and often, I'm sorry to say, they were adult children of alcoholics that would say, let's get them alcoholics and get them into treatment, you know? And that was not our mode. What we did is create a safe place, so when people were ready, they would step into the ministry. Now, we weren't forcing them, we weren't pulling them, you know, by the arm, but we were waiting for them to be ready. Okay. There we go. So that's the first one. The second one is to have the conversation. And that can be in so many different places. It can be in a Bible study. It can be from the pulpit. It can be a conversation in the hallway. It can be whatever. It's us telling our stories. It's giving our testimonies. It's all of those things. It's the preaching and teaching from the pulpit. But part of it, the congregation needs to be ready. And what this process, this training series process is to embrace that dance. I don't know about you, but to me, when I'm working with people, and this is the fun part of working with people, is that dance, because there's resistance and there's receptiveness. And you're trying to figure out, where are people resistant and where are people resistant to what you're saying and what you're trying to accomplish. And that is the dance. So that's the last underlying goal, is to meet people where they're at in their experience and then their understanding. And unfortunately, what happens is we get ahead of ourselves and we don't meet them where they're at, but we meet them where we want them to be. I want you to be saved. And the reason we're doing this is evangelism and this is outreach. Well, that's your timing, that's your agenda, that's not theirs. As opposed to be the hands and feet of Christ and meeting them where they are. Are you meeting them, the woman at the well? Where are you meeting the people? Or are you meeting the prostitute who's about to be stoned? Where are you, or the pastor whose nephew just committed suicide and the mother is relapsed? Where are you meeting them? Or a grandparent who is fearful about, now there's all sorts of drugs. Used to just be alcohol when I was growing up. Now there's also, what's this, methamphetamine? Oh, now we're into a new opioids. What is all this stuff? So it's meeting people where they're at, you know? So the two are, part of it is to find that love of God. And we have two avenues, and sometimes they mix. Sometimes they don't. The first one is our spirituality. It's our response to our human sense of incompleteness. I am not complete. I need God's love. I need your love. You need my love. We need that community, you know. And so here, well, it's the next slide. So that I liken to, well, let me go on to the religion. Religion, on the other hand, is the communal expression of that response. And unfortunately, what happens sometimes is that communal response gets tied to doctrine. And so we lead with our orthodoxy. You need to believe what we believe before we allow you in. As opposed to orthopraxy, where we're practicing God's love. We're trying to fill that hole in the soul and be the hands and feet of Christ and meeting people where they are. And so it's orthopraxy. It's the practice of God's love. So they might want to know what your doctrine is, but that comes after you have a relationship with them and are meeting them with where they are in their experience and understanding. So part of this is really help developing people, a team of people, develop the capacity to do that. To love your neighbor as yourself. In early recovery, I was thinking, my God, why would I want to love my neighbor as myself? I am filled with self-loathing. Does God want me to hate everybody? Because that's love my neighbor as myself. Well, I don't like myself too much. And isn't that true in those of you in recovery? Is what we walk through is, when we're intolerant with ourselves, we tend to be intolerant with other people. When we're impatient with ourselves, we tend to be impatient with everyone else. When we're, all of those things, it's kind of a reflection of where we are, because this is an inside-out job. So part of it is if I want to have an authentic placed a community, I need to be transparent and I need to be accepting. And it first starts with me. Am I transparent? Am I being honest? Or am I afraid to tell my story? And to me, that's the transformational nature of this, is my ability to tell my story. To be able to be comfortable with your own story and your own skin. And then to be able to communicate that story. How many people, when they're telling their story or giving their testimony, they go, I don't want to tell that piece. And you might have heard me say, and I'm a grateful recovering sex and drug addict. Well, the drug addict I can handle. What's the sex thing? I thought I heard you say that. What's that all about? Well, I read Patrick Carnes' book in 1982, and I'm going, I am that too. I am that too. And so I started to go to meetings in 1983. And now I've sponsored many, many, some who've been in prison, some who, sex offenders. I was not that. But mine was internet pornography way back when. I found a box of magazines when I was 11 years old at a paper drive in the church parking lot. It was like a gold mine. 11 years old, and oh, wow, this is cool, and I became the distributor. I was the dealer. Everyone knew that Drew had a box of this, Swank and Playboy and all that stuff. That's what it was back then, Now it's a little bit different. And that's growing. That's like a tsunami wave coming across our nation because of access to internet and all of that. Anyway, so the greatest commandment, I spoke to that. When you think of addiction ministry, what's a Bible story that you think of that could be foundational to this ministry? Just shout it out. And if you have an idea there in Zoom land, just type it up. What would be a Bible story that you would see as kind of foundational for this ministry in your congregation? One of them is the greatest commandment, of course, to love your neighbor as yourself, to love God with all your strength. Say more about that.
Being in captivity and then being free from captivity by having to go through the waters. And then you get 40 years in the desert.
Yeah. And what was interesting about that story is, what did they do early on in that journey?
Complained a lot.
They complained a lot, and what did they want to do?
Go back.
They wanted to go back into slavery. They wanted to get back into bondage. It's like, yeah, that was terrible, but this is, this is uncomfortable because it's not very familiar. At least I knew what that was about. Excellent. What a foundation. People can relate to that. The Good Samaritan, the prodigal son. Anyone else? Others?
The woman at the well.
The woman at the well. Definitely. Very powerful story. You can build a ministry on that story. So one of the things I say when I do these trainings is, I'm not here to change your theology. You have spent a lifetime developing your own theology. Who am I to think I can change your theology in a few workshops? But what I am here to do is have you rub up against your theology and to see if it's an effective response to addiction and mental health issues. That's my role. That's Faith Partners' role, is to see if it's effective. Because sometimes it's not. Because we have work to do. It's not techniques always. It's often our own functioning of how effective we can be. Are we a high functioning person that can really lead a person to where they need to go? So this is a good one. One of my favorites to me is the cripple at the well, or cripple at the pool. Been there for how many years? How many? 38 years? 38 years at that pool. And Jesus approached him, and what did he say? Do you want to be healed? I think Jesus was the original Al-Anon member. Don't you think? I mean, he was the founder of Al-Anon. Do you want to get healed? Do you want to be well? No. Okay. Until you're ready, it's up to you. I have boundaries. I have self-care. I'm not going to do it for you. I'm not going to do the emotional roller coaster of whether you want to get well or not. I have a life too. So anyway, enough said. These are some of the whys. So one of the things that we also do is we look at faith and practices of faith. We also, the best practices of science, and to be able to merge those things. So we look at this, and this is a significant year, I think. It's 2001, and you'll go, oh my God, this is 20 years old. It's 20 years old. Don't you have any new statistics, new research? God, it's old. Well, this is when I really got started at Faith Partners. And one of the things that was significant about this is, anyone ever heard of Joseph Califano? he did some research with clergy across the country and developed a report called So Help Me God. And I'll speak to that in a little bit here. But one of the things he discovered, one of the pieces was, and with Harold Koenig, who did a literature review of about 1,200 surveys or research studies, is one of the things that he learned is there's 126 medical schools in the United States. In 1990, 5 of them did anything around spirituality and religion. There was just no connection between spirituality and religion and medical science. By 2001, 11 years later, 80 of the 126 medical schools were doing research and having classwork on spirituality and religion. Over those 11 years in the 90s, they started to merge. And it's not that the church was changing, it was medical science was going, my gosh, there's something to prayer, there's something to community, there's something to these things that you kind of intrinsically know, but we want to put numbers to it so we can say, yes, this is right. Okay, so you see that lower levels of physical disease, lower levels, people's ability to cope. Christians who are active Christians in community, their hospital stays tend to be shorter. I mean, there's just so much research around this. Stronger coping skills, all of those things. When we talk about adolescence, and adolescence is the most healthiest we're ever going to be physically. Maybe not emotionally. Our brain still is in development. That takes till about age 25. And I have a friend of mine who wanted to write a curriculum alive till 25, because she thought that if you could get people to age 25, they'll do fine, So, but that's when our brain is fully developed. That prefrontal cortex, where the judgment center that goes, that's not a good thing. You might not want to do that. That has some consequences to it. So it's bringing that together and understanding that. And what happens in the church at 15 or 18 or 21? They fall off the planet. That is where that's huge ministry right there. Huge ministry. You know that when people, adolescents that go to college, that, the most dangerous time? The first semester. There's more alcohol-related injuries in the first semester than the rest of their whole college career. That is ministry right there. It's huge, huge time of ministry. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. So what do we want to do? We want to mitigate those risks from adverse childhood experiences. And do you recognize the church in any of this? Social, emotional competence of children. Hopefully there's some of that that's shared when we talk about moral development and as a youth, working with youth, we would ask those tough questions and we'd have those conversations and we would talk about feelings and we would talk about, where's God in that, Concrete support in times of need. That's the beauty of the church. It's the only community that is intergenerational in our community. So you get people from birth to death, sperm to worm, and everything in between. Yeah. I was in West Side Story in high school, and that was a line in there. I've never forgotten it. Anyway.
I'm grateful that you used it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I was Tony, by the way. That was big. Anyway, concrete support in times of needs. There's ministry points along our whole lifetime. I'll be taking care of you at some time, and sometime you'll be taking care of me. And we can do that if we're in authentic community, where there's acceptance and transparency. Supportive social connections. Hopefully that's where the church is at. I believe that the pandemic has put a light on that. People are not coming back to church in some ways. It's easy for them to just stay in their slippers and pajamas and not go in. But are they really getting connected? Do they really feel that they're part of a community? So what are we doing about it? Well, they'll come back if they want to. I know some pastors that through the pandemic, they would call. They'd go down the rolls of their church and just go, how are you doing? How are you doing? How are you doing? Or they would have a group of people calling and going, how are you doing? How are you doing? Perfect for this ministry because it's a relational ministry. Calling people, I haven't seen you, you know. Obviously, you know, we've all been away for 18 months. So to make those connections, because once you have that relationship, you can start becoming more and more transparent. So knowledge of parenting and child development, and those things can be taught and they can be supported, you know. Question to you, and I'll just see if in Zoom, hopefully you have these as well. 2 questions. The faith community, my congregation, has communicated a clear, consistent message regarding substance use. They're strongly agree, undecided disagree, strongly disagree. Okay, think about that for yourself. Do you think that the church has communicated a consistent message? I see some wagging of heads. No, yeah? Not really? Anyone have a comment to that where they go, yeah, this has been my experience?
I think sometimes that message may come from the pulpit, but it's not circulated in the congregation.
So what you're saying is sometimes it does come from the pulpit, but it's not circulated around to the rest. Right. Yes.
So, you know, like, you always get the question, is being a substance user a sin?
Right.
Right? Think about Bible stories. I think about, you know, quote something in this, you know, first one, you know, without no sin, you know, cast the first stone.
Right.
You know, so,
When they're stoning the prostitute, yes.
and so I think that sometimes the message must
Yes.
in the congregation.
Yeah.
Because it's not supported enough on a regular basis.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what this is all about. I mean, there, and I'll be getting into this in just a little bit, but there was a program a number of years ago called One Church, One Addict. And so what was happening is they would train one person, you know, who often was in recovery from a congregation, and they'd go back to their congregation, and what would happen? They would be so excited. It's like going on a retreat and trying to communicate what happened, the transformational nature of that retreat. You're going, and then this happened, and no, there was so moving, and you go, yeah, okay. This sounds beautiful for you, you know. Go ahead.
I think, you know, I was looking at question number 1, because our congregation has begun, hopefully in earnest, but I'm hung up on the word clear, because we still get different reactions to our proposals and what's going on, and the different responses. So I'm just trying to figure out where we're going wrong in our messaging, where there's still, we have no illusions, we're going to face a lot of resistance. But at the same time, we like to think we're clear on saying, hey, this is going to be incredible for the entire community.
Yeah.
And still to get so much pushback is kind of disheartening. Wow, where's the clarity gone wrong? You know,
Yeah.
How do we stay there?
And I'm going to get to that. We're going to speak to that because it's exactly what you're saying. There is that dance of resistance and receptiveness. And the beauty of what we're looking at is not just one person going out and then coming back, but a team of people. So when you get discouraged, it's like, oh my gosh, it's like we're swimming against the tide. Can we do this? So you have a team of people that are doing it together. It's like having a family, and there's a person who goes off and goes to Al-Anon. You know, not necessarily the person in recovery or the person who needs recovery, but well, they need a different kind of recovery. They go off, they get some self-care skills and boundaries, and they come back to that family system, and the family system changes. Just like these teams, they go off, they get some training, they come back with a sense of they're functioning differently, with self-care and whatnot, and it changes that system. It changes the congregational system. It's slow. We all internally are filled with resistance yeah, I love the theologian Walt Whitman. One of the things he talked about was be curious, not judgmental. So I always say, and this is my therapist, I can hear this rattling around in my head, is, Drew, be curious about your resistance. Just be curious. Don't judge yourself because you're pushing back. Just be curious about it. So you're thinking about, why am I so against this change? Doing Zoom, I was resistant towards it because I needed to have that in-person stuff. Well, you work through that and are working through that. So anyway, love you people in Zoom land. The next one, the basic issues in substance abuse prevention of, recovery from, and treatment of substance use disorders are spiritual. Oh, I see some nodding of heads. Interesting. Someone speak to that. Prevention of, recovery from, treatment for.
I think it aspect is spiritual. So I think that for our clients, we got a license program. It's just hope, faith, and love.
Mm-hmm.
Those are eternal.
Yeah, spiritual principles.
Spiritual principles. And people whose faith, they don't sense love or feel love.
Yeah.
Or receive love.
Yeah.
That's where the recovery has to begin. And accept that God's purpose for you is to have faith, hope. You have a purpose.
So in Zoom land, we're talking about faith, hope, and love. If you couldn't hear that, that's integral to the spirituality of a person and the principles of the congregational life. So, and it's true in recovery and all of that. I would always have pushback with this, but it is physical and it's genetic and it's also social and it's all of those. So you have that pushback, and to me, that's the part of the conversation. This is just the conversation. This is just an example, a couple of questions. And that's one of the things I would suggest you do, is not go, well, this is our position on this now. First, have the conversation and see where people are at. And then go, okay, what I'm hearing is we could probably be here.
And what I said, I'm not denying those other things.
Right.
I mean, because science is there.
Yes.
And all person approaches recovery goes back to what you said, get them where they're at.
Right.
And help them work through their own resistance if they really want to.
Yeah. I've changed the question, and instead of the basic issues, you would put the primary issue. And that would make it more controversial, and it made it for a better conversation, actually. So how you develop the questions are critical. And the best way to develop the question is where it is very dichotomy. There's a dichotomy. It's either or. And they go, it's very dogmatic. Primary, I don't know if I would say primary. It's part of it, and thus the conversation happens. So anyway, let's move on. So historically, and I have a good friend that says, "Oh, Drew, this stuff is archaic." Yeah, but this is foundational. There are many different perspectives to looking at this. The behavioral, that it's learned behavior. My parents drank and drugged and whatnot, so I learned that, and that's the way they dealt with life. So that's how I learned to deal with life. The psychiatric model, adverse childhood experience. So that trauma, it stems out of that, out of pain. moral, that it's, you know, it's free will, it's defective willpower, it's sinful nature, and then the disease model where there's symptomology, all of those things. So my question to you is, which one is it?
There's an element of all of them.
Exactly. And that is part of what I try to communicate with people is there's an element of all this in there. What you need to do is know where you're coming from when. Am I coming from a moral model at this point? Am I coming at it behaviorally? Am I coming at it with a psychiatric bent? Know where you're coming from. Because again, how effective are you being with that person? Are you meeting them where they're at? Maybe you might be coming from a moral model and they really need to hear that, yeah, you had a rough childhood. Let's talk about that. So you're not two ships passing in the night. Okay, the what? I spent way too much time on the why. That survey that I talked about, that research study, so help me God, this is some of the stuff that came out of it. 94% of clergy said this is an important issue, substance use problems. The second one, how many people do you talk to in your pastoral care tend to have this issue? About 38%, 50% or more. I often ask pastors, does that seem right? That seem about the right percentage? It seems low. That's what I often hear. It seems low. Because what tends to happen, and this is what we've learned from this, is we have basically a two-prong approach. We train clergy to be more effective in their role, and our main focus is to develop that congregational addiction team ministry, a lay ministry. Because what you see, then you look at that third, because sometimes what's happening with clergy is they aren't asking the right questions. You know, the person will come with a parenting issue or economics, they're not making enough money, or you know, those types of things, parenting. And the underlying issue is that they're using. And that's why their parenting is not so good. And that's not why they're not making that much money. And that's why they're not getting the jobs they want. So to be able to ask the right questions and to meet people where they're at. Then the last one, 12%, and this is an old study, and it has improved. Part of the reason it's improved is because of organizations like Johnson Institute and the National Association for Children of Alcoholics, who developed the clergy core competencies and started to develop curriculum and get it out there. And we were part of that as well, because we were part of Johnson Institute at the time. But 94%, 12%, huge gap, huge gap. And so what we realize is the experts are sitting in the pews. It's the health educator, it's the treatment provider, it's the counselor, it's the teacher, it's the law enforcement officer. They're sitting in the pews and they experience these issues all the time, and they are the experts. So how do you train that group to have a presence in the life of the congregation? This is what we do. It's a group of trained team in these areas. So I wanted to move to this because to me, this is the distinction between a number of other models, processes, approaches, is we really look at that whole continuum, from abstinence to dependency. We also look at this, I mean, this is looking at alcoholism. This also could be mental health. When you look at mental health through the pandemic, on one end you have, I'm feeling normal, you know, whatever normal is. Or, you know, I'm more anxious than I've ever been. This uncertainty of whether I'm supposed to wear a mask next to you, or do I give you an elbow or shake your hand or give you a hug, or, you know, and when will this end? So there's that anxiety, and then there's a place where you're struggling with life. And then you get to the other end where not able to function without medical attention, either therapy or medication or whatever. We all can relate to that. We're somewhere on that continuum. And so the beauty of this ministry is looking at, there's ministry points along the whole continuum. And what tends to happen is we do recovery ministries. And what we've done in doing so, is we've again isolated that group of people and potentially stigmatized them again. Well, you know who meets in room 222, those guys, or those people,
Who's in the basement on Monday?
And who's in the basement? Yeah. And are they, this is how close that, they get is, they smoked in that room again. That's the secretary, Now we have non-smoking meetings, so we don't have that as much anymore. But I remember those days.
Well, it's interesting when you look at some of the clinical data. They do this in the medical community. Huge part of just general population is right in that problem use and abuse area. But hardly any of those people, it's never addressed. So it's like that secret in the closet.
That's right.
And so that's never going to come out in the congregation or social. I guess you would call them, I always love the term functioning addicts.
Sure.
But need that help so they don't break it down.
Yeah.
Or at least some awareness.
There's so much we can do with this, just with this little continuum. There's so much we can do with it. We can start to define what those things mean. What's abstinence mean? The NIAAA abstinence is 1 drink or less per year. Well, for me, it's not enough, or one's too many, 1,000 not enough. People in recovery. So that doesn't work for me. But we start to define those terms, and then we start to talk about rationale of why do you choose to abstain? Well, because I grew up with 2 alcoholic parents, and I didn't want to do that. Or it's part of my religious beliefs, or I'm in recovery. I've been to the other side and I'm back, I'm back to this. But there's points along that whole continuum, ministry points along that whole continuum. And what ends up happening is we focus here, and what we do is we tend to draw the line right here between abstinence and the rest of the continuum. In some congregations and some faith traditions, some faith traditions are abstinent based. So either you use or you don't use. Baptists, that's true for. Muslims, that's true for. Different sects of the Jewish tradition. I mean, it's true for a lot of different faith traditions. And if you're in the middle there, where you use moderately, and you're being lumped with people that are really struggling with their alcohol use or their medications or whatever it might be, their mental health, you go, I can't relate to that. And what we've done is separate. So we draw that line, we create a gap. What really needs to do is we need to draw the line right here, and we need to respond to this group of people who are abusing. I used to work in adolescent treatment at Hazelden, and I would take all 10 days to figure out where they were. And you'd give them, I can't diagnose you as chemically dependent or, with alcoholism, but you're definitely abusing, and the parents would go, oh, phew, we're safe, well, yeah, it's not so bad. Well, maybe give it some time, and, and there's a lot of abusers who still go out and drink and drive and kill somebody or kill themselves. So there's a lot of education that needs to happen throughout that whole continuum. And that other part, prevention, early intervention, referral assistance, all those things need to happen. And when I look at this, especially with alcohol, how many of you think abstain? People 21 years and older abstain in the United States. Now, this is from a person who works in treatment.
Not many.
Not many? It's actually about 30%. It varies. This is based on household surveys, 28 to 32%. It kind of ranges in there. So about 30%. Now we look to the other end. How many people are diagnosably alcoholic or chemically dependent in the United States, 21 years and older? About 8 to 12%. Some people say 10 to 15%. Then you look at abuse, or what's the new term? I'm sorry, moderate dependency. Yeah. That's where the person's having harmful consequences, but they haven't lost control necessarily. That's about 22 to 24%. So you put 22 and 8%, let's just say 30% on that end, 30% on the other end. What do you have in the middle? 30, 30, 40%. It's basically a bell-shaped curve. So if I was in your congregation, I would go, you know, are you on this continuum? Raise your hand if you're on this continuum somewhere. Well, raise your hand, yeah. You're all on this continuum. So are we doing the ministry just for this 30%, or are we doing the ministry for the whole congregation? And not stigmatizing this group once again. And stigma, we're basically talking, they have a mark of disgrace. And in the Lutheran tradition, grace is really critical. That unmerited gift from God. There's nothing that you can do that will separate you from the love of God. Now, if you have a mark of disgrace, yeah, they're definitely, you're separated, man. You're a goner, you know. That's what stigma does. It isolates. It puts.
We just, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, John.
8 to 12%, that's just alcohol alone.
Right.
About all the other addictions out there, that it grows exponentially too. Like, so, the most shocking addiction, opiate addiction, gambling addiction, porn addiction.
Right.
Those things are in that congregation. So, could we increase that number? You know, instead of just, you know, instead of saying alcohol, what form of penance?
Yes.
What is the real?
Thank you, John. And that's, I can't do that necessarily, but one of the things we do know is addiction tends to cluster. So if a person's using alcohol, they might be gambling as well, and they might get into internet pornography, and they might, so there's a cluster of behaviors that happen. We can do some cross tabulations and figure that out. And in fact, the people that do the surveys for Faith Partners is the Southwest Addiction Technology Transfer Center out of the University of Texas. And so they've done some research for us around that. But we haven't asked the question in such a way to do that. But anyway, you're exactly right. We could do a bell-shaped curve. We could look at the curves for all these different behaviors, and the fact that if you expand that to other things, it might expand. And then you think about the family members that's affected by that individual, that expands it even further and further and further. So I will often ask when I'm in a congregation, who here has been touched by addiction? Rarely do I have anyone, you know, where it's not the majority of people raising their hands. So why aren't we talking about this? You know, why are we not talking about this? So anyway.
The reason often is that people say this is not proclaiming the gospel in a very narrow frame of what the gospel is. And if you step outside of that, you get a tremendous amount of pushback.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, what would you say the gospel is?
Well, it's the good news of Jesus Christ that we have been saved.
We have been saved. Yes. So can anyone, would you say that one of the most transformational stories is the one of a person who's had addiction?
Absolutely.
I think I've been saved. I was dead, and now I'm alive. I have come to the end of myself. In fact, the beauty of an addict or alcoholic, a person with addiction, is they have the gift of desperation. Because they know if they continue to use, they will die onto themselves, which we're being asked to do. And that rarely happens in the pews. People don't come to the end of themselves, and they'll lead with their strengths and never let you know what kind of weakness that they have. They might be dealing with anger. You know, they're yelling at their children, and oh, we've just pulled into the church parking lot. Everyone come on, calm down, everyone calm down, everyone look good, you know, and that's their issue. And it might stem from maybe some adverse childhood experience they've had that they haven't dealt with. They didn't use, but they carry that pain, which gets acted out into anger. Rarely is anger the primary emotion. Anger is psychological arousal or physiological arousal. It's preparing that fight or flight response. Well, that's hypervigilance, and that's protecting the hurt and the fear. So to be able to allow somebody to get at their fear, if we can see somebody who's angry or defensive and realize that person's afraid, they're afraid like a 7-year-old child. They're hurt. If I can look past the anger, I can see what's going on and meet them where they're at. Instead of get caught up with the defensiveness and the anger, I can see them. So this is the scope of the work. Prevention. When's the best time to do prevention?
Yesterday.
I love it. In Zoom land, she said yesterday is the best time to do prevention. I buy that. Anyone else venture a guess or have a response to that? The best time to do prevention for me is times of transition. That's when people are most vulnerable, most open. So give me some transitions in people's life. How about for youth? Divorce. If their parents get divorced, it's a huge transition for the child. You bet. Now what? Other transitions. Going to college. Confirmation. Transition. Yeah.
I'd say the transition from elementary to junior high or from junior high to senior.
Huge. You will get parents' attention when they're going from grade school to middle school and middle school to high school. It's like, oh, my kid's going to start using drugs in that middle school. They're starting to do that. They're starting to beat up. People are getting beat up and all that stuff. You'll start to get people's attention. Transitions during adulthood. Marriage. Divorce. Jobs. Death of a parent. Death of a spouse. Birth of a child. All these transitions are critical. What happened in 2008, 2009? Oh, even now in this pandemic. Unemployment or underemployment. That's a transition. The beauty of a church, which is intergenerational, is I can come up alongside you in those times of transition. And provide you ministry. Provide you knowledge, provide you skills, provide you support during those times of transition. And that we're talking about resiliency. We're talking about resiliency across the lifespan. The ability to bounce back from whatever adversity we've experienced, be it death, unemployment, whatever it is. That is when most people are receptive to the prevention message or prevention in and of itself. So we talk about that. We talk about planning for that. What kind of church do you have? Well, we have 200 members. Is it a lot of white and blue hair, or do you have youngsters in there as well? No, we don't. Well, probably prevention for young kids is probably not what you want to do. But what we know is the fastest growing population of alcohol abuse is older adults. So we could do that because they're losing their spouse, they're losing their friends for a lifetime, their body is falling apart. They no longer have purpose because they aren't working, they ... So how do we step into their lives? Prevention is one. Early intervention. 94% of people have somebody in their life they're concerned about. This is from a Gallup poll. Same people were asked, have you talked to them? 34%. 94, 34%. Huge gap. Why? People just don't know how. The person, my choir member that said, here, my nephew committed suicide, and now my daughter-in-law is relapsing drinking again. Drew, what do I do? I know this is what you do.
So are you going to talk about what Faith Partners does? Like what's your model? Or I don't quite understand what Faith Partners is.
Okay, good. So we have 20 minutes to talk about that. So faith partners, what we do is we train a core group of people. We pour that foundation of this knowledge of what is prevention. Because I bet you there's as many definitions as there are people in this room. And to know what are some evidence-based types of programming. So what we're doing is we're creating some structure within a congregation, and it can fit under a health ministry, it can fit under a small group ministry, it can fit under all these different things. But it's a group of people that plan to create an educational platform for whatever comes down your way. So you might walk in, let's talk about substance abuse, but then all of a sudden you have internet pornography becomes a large thing, or gambling. So you bring in people and do some educational process. And you have a group of people that are dedicated to do that, to create a safe place where you can have that conversation and meet people where they're at. And plan for that. Be very intentional about it. Not, well, you know, we might preach about it every, you know, twice a year or something like that. It becomes something very intentional. So it's creating that structure, and then whatever comes is there's ongoing education that needs to happen. So you might talk about adverse childhood experience and trauma-informed care. You might talk about screening and brief intervention. You might talk about motivational interviewing. You might talk about all those different things. And that is the model. And it's very organic, and it is not a program. It is a ministry. And what I mean by that is a program is generally, my own pastor in Austin, Texas goes, you know, this is really confusing me. I do much better with a 6-week video series. It's not that. It is creating a plan with some result statements to say, well, we need to educate parents about this particular thing because this is part of our community. So it's developing a plan and having a group make that happen. And then to be able to wrap around, why are we doing this theologically? Why is this important? How does this fit with the mission of our church, you know, or our missional focus?
What we found really helpful before we got this whole thing started at Transfiguration is that we did a survey of the congregation to find out where they were in their thinking about a whole range of things.
Right.
And it was based out of that we could begin to develop a plan for, okay, now we have some idea.
Right.
Definitely not a definitive idea, but some idea of where this group of people is.
So, yeah.
And we can take it from there with the training that you're talking about.
Exactly. So the survey he's talking about, that's part of bringing in the science of it. So we have UT, University of Texas, you do a pre-test or a survey. And the things that come out of that is it becomes a recruiting time. You can recruit team members. People will go, oh, I'd like to be a part of that. It also identifies needs in the congregation. What are the needs? What's going on? And I've often had pastors who will go, well, I know what the needs are. You know, we don't have many people that are addicted. And I'll go, have them take the survey. Yeah, I know my congregation. And then I've had one pastor, he did it, and he looked at the results. He goes, Drew, we never had this problem before we took this survey. You know? So what it does is it really, you wrap your mind around the congregational community needs, and then it determines the direction of the ministry. Where do we go with this? So it's not, here's a cookie cutter, this is the program, this is what you're going to get. You know, it's, here are the problems, and that's the difference with ministry. Ministry is evolving and it changes, and as new things come in, the ministry changes as well. So you're constantly serving the congregation where they're at, and what guides it is the capacity of the team, what's their gifts and talents, what are the needs of the congregation, what's the receptiveness of the congregation. You know, an example of that, Methodist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, they had 8 years into this ministry, they had a knock at the door, and this person says, I'm a sex offender, I'd like to worship at your church. Okay, now what do we do? So that they give us a little bit of time. They took about 2 or 3 months. They developed policies and procedures and all that stuff. Again, this is organic, and organic is more of a secular term. Really, it's spirit-led. So they said, we want to meet this person where they're at. So they developed policies and procedures. They couldn't go down the child hallway because they were, their sex offense was with children and whatnot. But they worshiped there for 2 or 3 years. From that experience, which developed the compassion of the whole congregational community, they had some people that identified themselves of having experienced sexual abuse as a child, and now they're adults. And they said, the next thing we want to do is we would like a therapist from the community to come in and work with adults that have been sexually abused. That would have never happened if that sex offender hadn't knocked on the door. That's the spirit-led nature of it. That's the organic nature of it. It's not, okay, we're going to do a 6-week. There can be 6-week series that inform, and then people will go, oh yeah, that leads to something else for me, you know. So does that help a little bit? All the walls are the prevention, early intervention skills, referral assistance. So it's connecting to community resources. So once people feel safe, you can make those referrals, knowing your limitations. It's recovery support. And there's so many different ways to do recovery. It can be just the pastor doing a sermon on it. It can be a pastor saying, you know, I'm in recovery and I'd like to pray for those still suffering. And oh, did he say he was in recovery? It's creating a climate where you can talk about recovery, and then advocacy, and that's finding your own voice, knowing your own voice. As a pastor, how much do I divulge? How much do I talk about? How much do I preach and teach about this? And then how do I allow the parishioners to be able to do the same thing? Do I help facilitate that? Anyway, does that help at all? No, go ahead. This is helpful.
So the title of this is Developing Transformational Leaders for Addiction Ministry. So it's faith partners about helping churches develop leadership within the church.
So the leadership would be these teams.
And so it's faith partners helping to create the teams.
Yes.
That's kind of what I was asking.
Yes.
Like, what is it that faith partners adds to churches that want to develop teams?
Yeah. So providing the research and the programming around prevention, around early intervention, you know, so talking about screening and brief intervention, talking about motivational interviewing, talk about recovery support and all the different modes of that, all the different treatment modalities. So people have an understanding. So then when they're referring to these resources, they know what they're talking about. And they're not afraid to bring up the subject because they know they have a resource in their back pocket. Oftentimes people won't bring it up because they feel like, well, then if I bring it up, then I'll have to deal with it. So.
Somebody says I'm suicidal, then probably know what to do.
Yeah. So what we do is we would, if there was a couple of suicides in the congregation, QPR training, question, persuade, refer. You know, provide the training because it has raised its head, and provide and develop some capacity within the congregation to be able to respond to that with the hands and feet of Christ. You know, so yes, and it's also clergy. I mean, this will not work if the clergy doesn't support it. You know, it has to be a clergy that's supportive and a lay person who goes, yes, let's make this happen. And then developing that team. So when we look at the 3 trainings, core trainings, the leadership training is kind of reviewing the blueprints. Is okay, what is the blueprints? Part of the blueprints is we're going to look at the whole continuum. We're not going to just look at recovery support. We're going to look at prevention. We're going to look at resiliency and helping people bounce back from things in their life. All of that, and doing it very intentionally and meeting the congregation where their congregation is at. You know, programs don't do that necessarily. It might fit a particular need, but the teams will be identifying the needs as they raise up. So, and then the team training is really planning for all those areas. How do you do prevention in your congregation is what? What's the name of your congregation?
The bridge.
The Bridge. How do you do prevention in the Bridge? What's the makeup of your congregation? What are we trying to prevent? It's asking those questions and helping people get to, what do we want to accomplish? Well, what we want to accomplish is to help parents talk to their kids about making alcohol and drug decisions. Okay, that's an objective. We can do that. When are we going to do it by? What parents do we want involved with this? Middle school, high school, whatever, or grade school? What are we looking at? So it's providing a structure and a framework to be able to do that planning and then to resource these congregations as they're doing it. Also, we often do it in a community. So it will be a network of congregations that it's not just 10 congregations doing things in isolation. It's 10 congregations networking on a quarterly basis and looking at how do we do community prevention and provide a strong community prevention message. It's how do we do recovery support where, well, you take care of legal services because you have some attorneys that are willing to give some of their time. You take care of furniture. You have a food pantry. How about you got a clothes closet? You have this. So when people leave treatment, we're there and we can come up alongside them and help them in their transition into society again, either from prison or military or treatment or whatever. That might be the ministry that this team decides to do or this network of congregations decide to do. I know it seems nebulous, but it starts to get more and more clear as you get traction, as you start to understand what are the needs.
So have you worked with, say, a local ministerial alliance? I'm thinking in my context, the two communities that I work in, my congregation are tiny, but the local ministerial alliances are actually quite functional and robust.
Yep.
And I can see possibly working with that organization
Yep.
to have kind of an ecumenical thing going on.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent idea. And I know we're running out of time here, and I just wanted to give you as much information, and thank you for the question. The way we often enter into a community is through a community coalition that has some federal or state funding. It might be a ministerial association. It might be a denomination. It might be the Baptist that will bring us in. We worked with the Methodists on a national level with the what was it called? The General Board of Global Ministries and the General Board of Church and Society. And they brought us around to their various jurisdictions. It can be a group of pastors. It can be all sorts of people that want to bring this to. So we have three ways that we've done this. One is through that network of congregations. Distance learning, which some of you might do if you do November 13th, which will be the leadership training. And the leadership training is, again, it's bringing together the pastor and maybe a lay person or two, say, this is what we want to do, and giving you the tools of going back to your church and go, this is what we want to do, here's our vision for it, ... And then recruiting a team and bringing them to a team training. And it's a 2-day training where they will then learn kind of the structure of it, looking at those 5 areas of ministry, filling those out, figuring out what does that look like in our own congregation, and then getting resource to do that. And then about six months later, doing a skills training. And that is what we would call, if this is pouring the foundation and framing up the walls, this is doing a building inspection. And it's like, how are you guys doing? Where are you at? How can we resource you? Where is there confusion? Where are you experiencing resistance? How can we help you with that? And then start resourcing you. And there's a lot of resources out there. A lot of resources. So it's connecting you to the resources that fit most. And then also getting you connected to community resources around you because they'll do your ongoing education. They'll want to do that. They love to do that. They want to connect with you. So helpful?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So part of it is the why we would even enter into this. The what is really looking at this as a model, connecting with community resources, having a team approach, looking at those 5 areas of ministry, planning for those 5 areas of ministry. And then the how is the first step is to take that survey, to do this training, and then to walk this path. And it's a journey. It's a journey. That's part of the scary thing is, well, I want to know what the end product is. Well, I'm sorry. God knows. Exactly. And for some, it's like, you know, my own pastor in Austin, Texas, Lakeway, Texas, he just goes, this is too nebulous for me. This is too organic, you know. And I'm thinking, oh, it's too spirit-led, or is that what you're saying? But what he didn't understand is prevention is preventional across the lifespan. It doesn't end after 6 weeks. You know, there's prevention for adults as well.
Well, to your point of transitions, we're going to experience transitions.
It gets you through transitions, exactly. And recovery, you know, some people go, oh, well, you went to treatment, why'd you relapse? Well, let's have a little understanding of what treatment does, you know. So it's creating that understanding so people can bridge. Last comment, and I got to.
Just to say recovery, I'm sure if you think about it, recovery is so huge.
Yeah.
Health issues, from relational issues, plethora of things that you always recover from.
Yeah.
And so in that aspect, the more generic it is, the more spiritual.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's some framework, and of course you can put in a program of life skills or celebrate recovery or Alcoholics Victorious or, you know, all these different formats. The one program I love is the Life Recovery Bible. It's wonderful. I think it's one of the best resources out there. I did that at Lakeway Church. And when I go, you know, let's do it for 12 weeks, 12 steps. We'll do it in 3 months. And they go, this is not enough. And so we ended up, do you want to do more? 2 years later. And I kept asking, you know, every other month going, is this taking too long? And they go, no, this is perfect. Because people were starting to unpack their stories. And they were starting, even though they didn't have a qualifier of a particular addiction, they were dealing with their anger. They were dealing with a child in their life. They were dealing with this, they were dealing with that. And they were starting to become transparent and feeling acceptance in that group. And to me, that's what this means. So that influenced, that group of people influenced the whole church. This is culture changing. It's not a program. It's changing the culture of the church. And to me, that's the new church. We can't go back to the old model of, you know, build it and they will come. No, I mean, what church has all their people coming back after this pandemic? They're kind of going, well, I don't need this so much anymore. Well, let's make it relevant. Let's make it a reason why they want to have authentic community. And to me, this is just I want the church to be relevant. That's the bottom line. That's my underlying thing. You know, addiction just happened to be what got my attention. And to me, addiction was the gift from God. It was God going, Drew, hello, I'm here. You know, it's the way it got my attention. So we have gone over, and please forgive me for going over.
We have just about 5 minutes.
Oh, we do.
We're supposed to be until 3 o'clock.
I think 2:45.
2:45.
Yeah.
We have gone a little bit over.
We have gone a little bit over, so it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. So I'm asking for your forgiveness, but that was an excellent question, and I'm glad he asked it. I'm hoping that after that question, there was a little bit more clarity. But it's not okay, this is exactly what you do, and then there's this step, and then there's this step, and there's this step. But we train you to plan for what you have and what resources are out there to bring your plan to fruition. You know, if I was to put it in a nutshell.
So it has to be based to the context of where you're going in, because there's no one program that's going, or one philosophy that's going to work in every place.
That's exactly right. And let me just show you this. And this is some of the readiness, the congregational readiness stuff. Let me just end with this. Most every church has a missional focus, whether they lift it up or are aware of it. They have a missional focus. And those can be, is it a healing church? Is it a discipleship church where you're equipping people to go serve out there? Come and see, come and grow, come and serve, abide with me, go out, you know. Is it a teaching church? Is it a church of evangelism? Is it a social justice church? And this list is not exhaustive. But if you know that the flavor of your congregation, this ministry often fits very nicely, and they'll figure out, do we work more on social justice and advocacy? Do we work on healing and recovery support? Do we work on evangelism and outreach and prevention? What do we do in education? What's the bent? What's the personality of our church? And where do we go with that? So thank you. That was an excellent question. Round of applause back to you. Thank you in Zoom land. I'm sorry I didn't see any questions or anything, but if you have questions, do not hesitate to contact me. Here you are. Here's my contact information if you want to connect with me at any time.